Uriah, Job, and Frodo. I do not understand God and his way of doing things. King David is called a man after God's own heart, and honored as the standard against which all of Judah's kings would be measured. There is much to commend David to our consideration, but his treatment of Uriah the Hittite is not one of them. Uriah and the Hebrew army were fighting David's battles while the king remained in Jerusalem. Seeing Bathsheba, Uriah's wife, David got her pregnant. To cover his transgression, he recalled Uriah from the battle in order that, sleeping with his wife, he would take David's child as his own. Uriah, however, was too loyal and honorable. And when they had told David, saying, Uriah went not down into his house, David said unto Uriah, Why didst thou not go down unto thine house? And Uriah said unto David, The ark of the covenant, and Israel, and Judah abide in tents. And my lord Joab, and the servants of my lord, are encamped in the open fields. Shall I then go into mine own house to eat and to drink, and to lie with my wife? As thou livest, I will not do this thing. 2 Samuel 11, 10 and 11. When getting Uriah drunk also failed to achieve the desired effect, David had him killed, taking Bathsheba as his own. An act of faithlessness and betrayal hardly rivaled in literature and reminiscent of Judas' kiss. The man to be admired here is Uriah. David was a scoundrel. David was an adulterer, a murderer, a faithless betrayer of one of his own mighty men who served him faithfully, a king who abused his power. Yet Uriah is a mere footnote, largely forgotten, while David is celebrated, lauded, and praised, and called a man after God's own heart. What can we make of this? What sort of God is this? Job's plight, too, is troublesome. We are told that Job, quote, feared God and shunned evil, and that he constantly made sacrifice for his children in anticipation of possible waywardness on their part. God is so pleased with Job that he brags to Satan concerning him, and then allows Satan to afflict Job to test his mettle. Job loses everything. And his response? The Lord gave, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. Chapter 1, verse 21. Then Satan and God meet again, and Satan declares that Job still has his health, so God allows even that to be taken from him. Job, by God's own judgment, is as good a man as walks the earth, a faithful worshiper. Yet great evil befalls him at God's behest and on a wager with Satan. Why? What sort of divine being would act so callously, so capriciously? In both of these instances, my visceral response is one of moral indignation and moral judgment. In the case of Uriah and David, I am offended by David's sin, and at God's elevation of David to praiseworthy paragon of virtue, especially in contrast to his treatment of Uriah. Moral condemnation of David's sin is uncontroversial, as God too clearly condemns it and punishes it severely. My moral condemnation, though, extends farther than this. I am offended that God would make an adulterer, a murderer, a faithless betrayer, an exemplar of his own heart. Why? In judging David's sin, I also judge David, finding him unworthy of God's title for him. On what basis can I do this? Judging David's sin is simple and justifiable, as it falls short of the moral law. the objective standards that define good human conduct. But what does it take to fairly judge a person? It takes two things. First, full knowledge of both the objective and subjective states of that person. And second, the moral authority to pronounce judgment. It takes, that is, righteousness. I clearly do not and cannot possess the first of these conditions. An infinite knowledge would be required, and I am a finite being, defined more by my ignorance than by my knowledge, as Socrates delighted to point out. And as to the second condition, when I claim that David's sins are so egregious that God could not possibly be justified in calling David a man after his own heart, I am in an awkward position, since when I am honest with myself, I am guilty of all David's crimes. While I've never committed adultery, my heart has not been pure. While I've never betrayed or murdered someone, I have done things, and recently, that mirror the treachery at a lesser scale. In short, I am too profoundly ignorant and limited, and too inherently sinful myself to judge even a single human being. Until we see in our self-reflections all the sins which we so rightly recoil from in others, we have not yet seen arighly. This is the real import of "Judge not, that ye be not judged." Turning our attention to Job, the problem gets even bigger, but also, hopefully, clearer. For the being I am now judging is God, the great I Am, or, from an atheistic perspective, being itself, the whole of reality. As Job makes clear, such judgments are simply beyond what a man can rightly claim. To judge everything would require a comprehensive understanding of everything, a universal position from which one might judge, not to mention a position of moral superiority. Job says at the conclusion of the book, "Surely I spoke of things I did not understand, things too wonderful for me to know. My ears had heard of you, but now my eyes have seen you. Therefore, I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes." If I am to believe in justice in an objective sense, whether or not I believe in God, I must also believe that it is a much larger matter than my limited understanding can clarify for me. That the position of judge escapes my grasp. I can never rightly claim this position. Before that infinite knowledge and righteousness, I can only see myself for the limited and faulty being I am. All else is willful ignorance, a lie. I can, however, and we all do, arrogate this position, God's position, each time I pass judgment on another. When I judge God, or being, I am claiming the place of infinite judge for myself. Paradoxically, it is the image of God, the spark of the divine in humanity, that endows us with this capacity of judgment. The loss of innocence in the garden began with, "Hath God said?" As I mentioned last week, intellectual pride is often the foundation of atheism, and this case of moral condemnation is a version of that arrogance. In condemning God, we are taking a position of infinite knowledge. In denying God, we are becoming God in our own eyes. The problem here is that we are not looking carefully enough at our own reflections in the looking glass. We are not being honest with ourselves about what we know or who we are. Again, as Socrates made clear, acknowledging our limitations knowing that we do not know, is the starting place of wisdom. The Bible says it theistically, but it's the same message. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Frodo, in Lord of the Rings, exemplifies our issue in a conversation with Gandalf. What a pity that Bilbo did not stab that vile creature, that is Gollum, when he had a chance. Pity? It was pity that stayed his hand, replied Gandalf. Pity and mercy not to strike without need. And he has been well rewarded, Frodo. Be sure that he took so little hurt from the evil and escaped in the end because he began his ownership of the ring so, with pity. Pity comes from the recognition of one's own finitude, one's kinship with other fallible and limited beings. It results from accepting our ignorance and moral failings and looking beyond them towards a more perfect standard against which everything about us, including ourselves, falls short. Frodo continues in his conversation with Gandalf. I am sorry, said Frodo, but I'm frightened, and I do not feel pity for Gollum. You have not seen him, Gandalf broke in. No, and I don't want to, said Frodo. Frodo's position of willing ignorance here is that of each of us as we pass judgments on others. We want God's position, to deny our own ignorance and moral deficiencies, as it makes us feel superior to the other fallible and limited beings surrounding us. We are better than those we judge, as Frodo makes clear when he first hears that Gollum is probably a hobbit, like himself. I can't believe that Gollum was connected with hobbits, however distantly, said Frodo with some heat. What an abominable notion. Frodo continues his conversation with Gandalf. I can't understand you. Do you mean to say that you and the elves have let him live on after all those horrible deeds? Now, at any rate, he is as bad as an orc, and just an enemy. He deserves death. Gandalf exclaims. Deserves it? I dare say he does. Many that live deserve death, and some that die deserve life. Can you give it to them? Then do not be too eager to deal out death in judgment, for even the very wise cannot see all ends. Notice that Frodo's exclamation is actually a moral condemnation, not just of Gollum, but also of Gandalf and the elves for not dealing out Frodo's judgment upon Gollum. It is a moment of extreme arrogance and superiority, of godlike pretensions, but it is also a moment of honest outcry. I can't understand you. Gandalf's response is to push Frodo back upon his finitude. As you have no power to give life to those who deserve it, so you are also not wise enough to pronounce judgment against others. It is our limitations that define us in place and time, in what we confront, let go, take up. If we willingly take up our finite burden, our cross, for Frodo, the ring, which represents totalitarian desire, the desire to be God, we are in a position to learn, grow, and progress towards the infinite through our finitude. Intellectual arrogance, self-righteous judgment, these are shortcuts to the infinite, with disastrous consequences. That David is a man after God's own heart is a call that only God can make. God's judgments are fully informed. Ours know but little, and even that in a glass darkly. If you're an atheist, the same prohibition applies. If there is no God, you still know nearly nothing about the world, its people, and their experiences. You cannot know that there is no God. I cannot know that God exists. But I choose to believe that he does. For both of us, belief passes beyond knowledge. Stepping back through the looking glass to a belief in God required me to answer, I don't know, to all sorts of questions, and be okay with that. It requires me to accept my ignorance, to refrain from judging on its basis, and to say alongside Job, though he slay me, yet will I trust him. I still don't understand God and his way of doing things. And that's okay with me. First, if you like this video, please like and subscribe. And let us know what you'd like to hear from us by commenting. Wise Words for Your Occasion is located in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, but we're willing to travel. For inquiries or to book an occasion, go to wisewordsforyouroccasion.wordpress.com or see us on Facebook or check out our YouTube channel. You'll find links to all three in this post.